Okay, welcome everyone. There's a porcupine in my outhouse, presented by Michael Togas with Storrs Library. Michael is a New York Times best-selling author, writing and co-authoring more than 30 books. You may have had a sneak peek at Michael's outdoors adventures if you attended Hidden Gems of New England with Allison O'Leary this summer. Michael and Allison have written multiple books together, and she shared some of their stories. Tonight, though, Michael will be sharing some of his own personal and humorous stories featured in his book, There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse. Based on his misadventures on his early years exploring New England's backcountry and at his remote cabin in northern Vermont, Michael will revisit some of those adventures, his first disastrous trip in his newly bought cabin, the history of outhouses, encounters with wildlife, and the history of mountain men. We'll visit special places across northern New England and explore the therapeutic powers of the woods. Michael, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me into your living room. That's a dangerous thing sometimes, but I grew up in Longmeadow. I was the class of 1973, so that gives you an idea how old I am. And I was telling Becky, I have a book coming out in March where the setting is Longmeadow. It's a memoir. It's titled The Waters Between Us, a boy, a father, outdoor misadventures, and the healing power of nature. So most of that book either takes place in Longmeadow or up in Vermont. And in some respects, it's a prequel to There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse. Plenty of humor in it, but there's also some serious topics in there as well. And I'll be announcing that in my next newsletter. And I was just thinking, if you wanted to get my newsletter, you could just shoot me an email and I'll add you. And my email is just Michael, and then my last name, Tougias @gmail.com. So I can add you to that newsletter that I'm actually working on right now. I was glad that Becky picked this topic because in these challenging and weird times that we're living through, this is like a nice soothing topic of nature, where some of the photos taken over the years are going to definitely lower your blood pressure. But then in about 3 hours, your blood pressure will go right back through the roof when you watch the debates. So you may want to choose one or the other. But at the end, we've decided to take any and all questions, and you could use the chat box for that or in person. And so right now, I'm gonna bring up my screen so that we can get to the slides and take you on this journey. And the age that this memoir follows is age 22 to 24, 25. So it really follows the first years that I bought this cabin in northern Vermont. And so much of that was influenced by my boyhood of spending a lot of time down in the meadows in Longmeadow along the Connecticut River, making rafts, catching fish, wandering around down there, and then wanting my own cabin. And I finally did that in 1978. I had been working in Chicago for a few months, saved up some money, really missed New England. I just could not see myself living in the Chicago area for the rest of my life. So got back to New England, and part of my idea was to escape that corporate job I was in. I was thinking, well, maybe I could be a wildlife photographer. That was before I had even started writing articles. So this was kind of all part of the plan, and I was reading up on mountain men and just wanted to kind of relive that magic feeling I had when my family used to vacation at Lake Morey in Vermont. Some of you may know that lake. It's in Fairleigh, Vermont. It's a real gem. And that was my pull to Vermont. So later I went to college at St. Michael's College. So I've always had this tie to Vermont. And part of the reason that Vermont attracted me was all the dirt roads. There's far more dirt roads than there are paved roads there. And I just love the whole idea of the, what's around the corner, follow those as far as you can until they peter out. This is one of my favorite dirt roads. This was taken in Cambridge, Vermont. You're looking at the north side of Mount Mansfield. So normally people see Mount Mansfield from Stowe, Vermont. Well, this is far to the north. You're looking south at the mountain. And this whole, northern tier of Vermont is really beautiful. It hasn't been totally invaded by New Yorkers, which are moving. I was just reading an article how they're moving in numbers even now into southern Vermont because of the pandemic. And I like those back roads because it forced you to be slow enough to notice the little things. A great blue heron. And just the fun of kids being on a river, these clear rivers with trout. You notice where I'm sitting right now, there's a striped bass coming out of the side of my head. I'm an avid fisherman, and that features in both Porcupine and the Outhouse and the waters between us. And one reader was saying, you've done these 30 books. I figured out a theme, and I'm like, I haven't. What is it? And they said, water is featured in every book. And you know what? It is in probably 27 of the 30 books. This particular shot, I was just there. Some of these photos you see were taken years ago, but I go back to a lot of my favorite places. This is on the north branch of the Lamoille, where so much of the river is carved through this beautiful flowing channels through the rock. And a little further up, following the river towards its source, was this old mill site. If you see on the right there, it's got the white birch coming right out of the mill. So to get back to age 22, I wanted to buy this cabin, so I had limited funds, of course, and I put the word out to realtors, and they would contact me. That is not my cabin. They would show me things I clearly could not afford. They would also show me places that I couldn't get to. I love this little island, and it is little. It's I was just up there a couple of weeks ago. The cabin is still there. They've built up the island a little higher, but you can't beat the privacy. Nobody can come out to your island without a boat. But this is the cabin I ended up buying. Well, now when I bought it, it looked a little bit different. There was no screened porch or that little deck on it. And even it's changed even since this picture, the surrounding areas. It was so shaded, so much mold was growing on the sides of it and moss that we took down some of those trees. I just posted about taking down trees and working with the chainsaw on my Facebook page. So I do maybe 3 posts a week on, it's just Michael J. Togus on Facebook. And I mentioned that as I get older, I'm doing less and less with the chainsaw, and how incredible it is of how fast trees come back. If you don't plant grass and just let the nature take its course. I've been measuring the trees. Within 5 years, new trees grow, and they're up to 30 feet. It's because they're getting full sunlight in that clearing. So the cabin was situated on this little pond. We're in northern Vermont, and it's way in the back corner. I hope they never put guardrails along the road. I love it because you could actually dive from the road right into the pond. But on that first trip, all I had was a hand-drawn map from where I had bought the cabin, and by the way, I bought it Christmas Eve. So I never really got a good look at the pond. So when I went up in the spring with my brother, we followed the map, and I knew the road kind of curled to the left around a pond, and the cabin would be up in the woods. Well, there was another pond right before it, and my heart sank because I thought, oh wow, I bought on this swampy pond, not a good pond for swimming. And we spent the first 2 hours on the wrong pond up in those woods looking for the cabin. But going back to the proper place, the cabin is far in the back there. And as far as changes go, again, I took this picture way back in 1978. The only change is there is a house on the left there now where they've made a clearing. But outside of that, development has not overrun it, which was my hope. And here's the famous outhouse. It's featured on a calendar called Outhouses of New England. I remember when the photographer asked me, can I shoot it? I'm like, sure, when do you want to meet up there? He goes, no, I like finding them on my own. But on that first trip, I remember being in the outhouse and hearing noises. I didn't know what it was. I figured it was mice in there. Later, I got the true story. But in the beginning of the book, what I try to do is weave in natural history with history, and then the story itself of kind of coming to realize I had so much to learn at the cabin. The meadows did not prepare me for some of the events that happened up there. And, you know, I saw porcupine scat by the cabin, but I didn't know what it was. Now, here's a real porcupine den. They'll be in rocky crevices. Oftentimes, more than one or two will be in the same area. And their scat is basically indestructible. It must take 100 years to biodegrade because the scat from 1978 is still near the outhouse. And the reason for that is they eat a lot of hemlock, very acidic. So as I mentioned, I'll include some history, and in the book I include the history of outhouses, you know, why people would put wood in the outhouse instead of building a wood shed. And the idea was every time you use the outhouse, you have to bring back an armload of wood for the wood stove. But these two outhouses, these are actually from the lost town of Enfield, that is now Enfield, Massachusetts, that is now underwater at the Quabbin Reservoir. And I just posted on my Facebook page, I had done a book called Quabbin, A History and Explorer's Guide, and dedicated the book to Les Campbell. Some of you may have heard that name. He was one of the top photographers in the country, and his mission was to preserve the old photographs of these towns before the Quabbin and then during the construction. And Les opened up all his archives to me for that book, and we became friends. He just passed away in the last few days, so I wanted to acknowledge him and think back of those happy times with him when I was doing the Quabbin book. So the way we discovered that the porcupines were living not only in the outhouse, but underneath where you sit in the outhouse was my brother Bob and I were sleeping on the porch and heard this screaming noise. It was awful. It sounded just like a murder. I had no idea porcupines could make any noise at all. Neither one of us wanted to go outside, and we finally went outside with flashlights, and that scream came and scared the life out of me. And it was coming from right above us, and they were in the tree, and when the searchlight, my little flashlight, was on them, they got nervous and they came down the tree. We followed them. They went behind the cabin, then went behind the outhouse where there was a hole, and they disappeared inside. And that's when it hit me that the noises I've been hearing were the porcupines that had made their den underneath where you sit in the outhouse, which is not really what you want in an outhouse. But later I did get a picture of one of them. And, I always felt pretty safe going up the trees trying to get pictures because they don't, the kind of the myth about porcupines is they can throw their quills, and they really can't. I've observed them up close over the years. What they do is they whip around really fast, and then with their tail they'll flick it into like the nose of a dog or a rider that gets too close up on the tree. But you could see those quills coming out the back. And it was interesting, this porcupine, as I'm coming up that branch, he didn't like being trapped, so he turned around. Now he's facing me and wants to get down. So I had to go down the tree backward and was entirely scraped because I certainly wasn't going to tangle with them. The tricky part about their quills, though, if they get in an animal, is they have tiny barbs at the end. So they kind of over time work their way in. The only predator they really have here in New England is the fisher. They're an elusive animal, but they're throughout Massachusetts now. I've only seen 3 in all my hikes, but they're well established here now. And in the, again, in the porcupine book, I get into the natural history, so I go into detail of how has the fisher figured out how to kill a porcupine when other predators like coyotes have not. So if you're in the woods and you see something like this, you might think, oh, a deer scrape, but usually a porcupine nibbling on the inner bark, the cambium bark, it'll go right around the tree. It'll be much higher up than where a deer would rub the tree with its antlers. I mentioned we added that deck, and well, that's my special spot. And people always ask me, and I'll kind of beat you to this question, do you still own the cabin? And the answer is yes. Probably the smartest thing I ever did was not be tempted to ever sell it, even when I was, working 24/7 in a corporate job. I'm so glad I hung on to it. That porch is kind of the one place I could sit still. I was definitely ADD as a kid, as I write about in The Waters Between Us, which got me in a lot of trouble because of my impulsiveness and attention span and willing to take risks. But now I find I could sit at that deck for an hour or two. And we added a raft and a dock. And as I mentioned, I'm reading every book there was about the mountain men. And there's a whole chapter in Porcupine and the Outhouse about my favorite mountain men. So I was figuring, well, there's a lot to learn from them for this idea I have of being a wildlife photographer and, living off the land. But really, most of it was not helpful. They're talking about how to hunt a buffalo. That wasn't going to help me in Vermont. Although it was interesting over the years to read, there were buffalo in the east. I haven't found anything to say they were in Massachusetts, but they were east of the Appalachians and then, slowly killed out. So we always think they're a Western animal, but they were in the east in much smaller numbers. And again, you go way back in time, we had everything like caribou here in Massachusetts, way back in the Paleo-Indian period. I've done several books about Native Americans, King Philip's War with Eric Schultz, and another book titled Until I Have No Country, which is a novel set in Massachusetts during that Indian War. Because in Longmeadow, you have King Philip Stockade and all these signs. And as a kid, I wondered, who the heck is King Philip? Well, King Philip is a Native American. His native name was Metacom. And boy, once you start researching it, you really get drawn into that period. But some of the mountain men, you had Jim Bridger and John Coulter. Coulter is fascinating. You've probably seen or heard of the movie The Revenant. It was not based on Coulter, but Coulter did have somewhat of a similar experience where he was captured by natives out west, and he was given a 50-yard head start to run naked. They took away all his clothes and any weapons. And one of the many tricks he used to survive as the natives were chasing him to kill him was hiding in a beaver dam. Dove into the water, went into the beaver lodge, and it's really quite a story. And then I jumped ahead to Daniel Boone. I just learned this just yesterday. I was reading a book called Young Washington. I never realized that Daniel Boone accompanied Washington on Braddock's march to take on the French that had built a fort where modern-day Pittsburgh is. So both Daniel Boone and George Washington were together at the same time during that period. And I read about how Daniel Boone fought off a bear attack, and I'm figuring, well, I'll have to learn more about black bears. So I have my share of wildlife encounters, as Becky mentioned, but I like to start small. This is something called a fishing spider, and it's amazing because one, they grow really large, almost as big as my hand, believe it or not. And their legs are covered with a very fine hair that allows them to actually walk right on the surface of the water. And the first time I saw one, I could not believe my eyes. It was actually living under that raft that I built on the pond, and I found out there was a lot more than that. But just, you delve into, it's kind of like a rabbit hole starting to research something as small as a fishing spider, how they mate. The male has to bring the female food first. It's like wine and dine. And then that led me to, okay, what other spiders are here in New England? And I was really shocked to learn that we have the black widow here in New England, because I've never seen one. And I'm like, are you sure? So I got a couple other books on spiders, and sure enough, they're not only in New England, but they're in Vermont. And I was reading one book, and it was about the black widows in New England. Again, there's not that many, but it was saying their preferred nesting spot is in outhouses. So this came on the heels of the porcupine, and now I had to worry about black widows living in the outhouse. That first month that I was up at the cabin, I remember this kid caught this frog. I asked if I could take a picture, and then I said, you ought to let it go. And he said, I'm going to take it home. And I said, oh, no, let it go. It lives in the pond. So he did. And then I went, on my way fishing along the pond. And then I heard the kids screaming for me, Mister, Mister. And I came running back. And I'll give you a warning. If you don't like snakes, close your eyes for this next picture, because the reason he was calling me back was a water snake had the frog that I told him he should let go and that it would be fine. And this was the start of my learning curve. And, when you boil down what's going on with wildlife, it's not quite the romantic view that I had or that many people had. It's really all about predator and prey. And of course, snapping turtles, I've been able to snorkel right up to them in the water. They feel right at home in the water, and they'll just glide away. They won't attack or anything, and they definitely serve their purpose of eating dead fish in any lake or pond or river. I had a strange incident with a rabbit. Now this question that I'm going to toss out, only a few people my age and up will remember, but does anybody remember that Jimmy Carter claimed he was attacked by a rabbit and everybody laughed and thought the president's losing his mind. But I'm here to say it was true, because I was walking near the cabin and this baby rabbit, I didn't even see it. So as I'm swinging my feet, I must have kicked it and it let out a squeal. And sure enough, the mother rabbit came out from the woods and actually chased me away. It was like nipping at my heels, a rabbit chasing somebody, 20 times their size. And then later when the mother calmed down, I was able to get this picture. But, so whatever happened to Jimmy Carter, it could be true, because something similar happened to me. I was shocked. Another type of wildlife that will protect its young, but in a different way, are birds, like killdeer. Ruffed grouse will do the same thing. They'll act like they're injured. And if you ever see that, say you're walking in the woods, you see a ruffed grouse that looks like it has a broken wing, just stop and stand perfectly still and search the grass below or the woodland floor below, and you're going to find the babies. You're either going to find the eggs or you're going to find the young chicks. Because what the mother is doing, she's drawing any predator away, a fox or whatever, thinking, oh, wow, look at this, a bird with a wounded wing. So we'll follow that rather than find the babies. But I learned not all mother birds will act that way. 2 summers ago at the cabin, there was I found 3 tiny little turkey chicks that had just hatched, and I could see the mother in the distance, and I figured, well, this is going to be a great wildlife shot. So I went in the cabin, got my camera, came back, got point blank to the chicks, and I'll tell you, that mother bird came running at me. It looked like something prehistoric, like a dinosaur with those big clawed feet, and it actually flew up. And then it was heading for my face. And of course, I raised my arms to block it, and I veered off at the last minute. But wildlife will do whatever it takes to protect their young. This little guy might be hard for you to know what it is, but it's actually a baby great horned owl. They're all pure white when they're born. It had fallen out of the tree, and then crows had mobbed the mother and actually eventually drove the mother away. So we actually I was checking on this over a 3-day period, and it was clearly gonna die. So I took it to a wildlife rehabilitation center, and then a few weeks later called them up and asked how it went, and they said, we just released it, it made it. So that was one of the times where interfering with nature actually worked. But every other time I've tried to, quote, help, it backfires. I've taken animals I thought were injured home, only to have them die at the house. I think the shock of it all, I should have probably just let nature take its course. I've even had a hawk drop a cedar waxwing almost right on my head, and took that home. It was eating raspberries out of my hand. I figured it'd be fine, flew away, came back to me, and put it in a box in the house, and it seemed fine, but the next morning it had died. So I sometimes wonder, should I have even just picked it up and let the hawk go on with it? But I figured I'd increase my odds of getting wildlife pictures by using game calls or deer calls. They work. I was able to call in some great deer shots. But then they kind of turned the table on me, and I was doing it in the fall, and a big buck came in and put me right up this tree. I put in the book how people have been attacked by bucks in the fall. And again, all part of my learning curve, but made for great photos as long as I come out of it unscathed. So I don't know if you could tell, but I put the camera top there so you could see the full scale of this bear track, and it caught my attention. And at this early couple of years at the cabin, I had not seen a bear there yet, but then saw this track down by my little swimming spot, so knew one was around. And this is one photo I did not take. All the other photos I took, but just the power of a bear. I just posted a photo, by the way, on that Facebook page, the Michael J. Togus page, that a friend took right from her window, and it looks exactly like this. A lot of the bears are getting too acclimated to people, knowing there's food in their houses. They're actually coming in some people's houses. I don't know if there's been reports of bear in Longmeadow or not, but they're all over the state. Numbers have been climbing. I thought I'd play a little joke on my brother, and I bought this bear's head, and I hid it in the back of the cabin, knowing that when he came up at night, the circuit breakers were off, and he'd have to walk in with the flashlight on, and the first thing he'd see was the two eyeballs staring back at him. But from this different angle, it almost looks like a black lab. Now, my favorite bear photo that I took was actually of a cub, a good-sized cub going up a tree. And I figured, well, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get some good pictures, so I'll get a little bit closer. And then I couldn't find it for a minute. And then we became the best of friends. Now, this is trick photography. That's trick. That's trick. Here's the real shot. What really happened was I took this shot, then I took a couple steps forward, and in that leafy brush way in the background, I could see it shake. And that told me the mother was there coming. I got out of there in a hurry. I've since learned if you see a black bear and it approaches you, or you startle one, in the Porcupine in the Outhouse book, I talk about how I startled one that was actually sleeping. So the wind must have been going from the bear to me, that it didn't pick up my scent. But the right thing to do is kind of freeze first and then move away very slowly, kind of almost in a sideways direction, so you don't trip and fall while you're moving away from the bear. And I won't give away the story of what happened with the bear that was sleeping, but I had not quite learned that lesson yet. Grizzly bears are a whole different matter. They scare the heck out of me. When I'm in Montana fishing, I am on high alert and try to make as much noise as possible. So I figured I'm kind of the king of my little 6 acres up there. The two characters in my book are Cogs and Boomer, who both actually grew up in Longmeadow. Cogs and I go all the way back, John Cogswell, and I go all the way back to kindergarten in Longmeadow and Blueberry Elementary School. But I had to reorganize that chart after a few weeks of going to the cabin, realizing we're way on the bottom, and all these creatures up there are the ones really controlling things, including the black flies, which are vicious. That's one of the drawbacks of northern Vermont, is the season, the warm season, is so short, because you have the black flies from May 15th to June 15th, then you finally get into the warm weather. You have July and August, and by September, I was just there, you get some really cold days and nights. So it's a short season. My chainsawing at the time, you'll see in the book that I start off with an axe, work up to a saw, then to a little chainsaw, and was making so many mistakes. I brought this tree down, and unfortunately it fell the wrong way and blocked our car in up at the cabin, so there was no way out until it took us a good full day to get that in pieces to get the car out. So I've learned over the years a little bit of logging skill, but if it's a really big tree, I have a logger handle it, because a lot of the trees die on their own, and they're going to come down on either your car or the cabin. The second year of owning the cabin, I figured I had a 2-week vacation, and I took a 10-day trip, leaving from the cabin. The X is the spot where the cabin is, and going along the northern border. And that, even looking back today, that was one of the happiest trips I've had. It was just great to be alone and rambling around. And at that point, I hadn't seen some of this beautiful countryside. Here's Nichols Ledge, not too far up in the Northeast Kingdom. The Northeast Kingdom of Vermont is worth the trip. If you're into mountain biking, the Burke area is a wonderful place. And there's inns there that I've stayed at. I did a book with Allison called Inns and Adventures, and we stayed at the Wildflower Inn, which was fantastic. We're up in Bar Hill, Greensboro. Some of you may even recognize this spot. It's Lake Willoughby. It's hemmed in by 2 giant mountains. You can't see them because of the fog is locked in there. The lake is 300 feet deep. Just an unusual lake. It looks like a fjord. Mount Pisgah is one you can hike up for a great view. And then the headwaters of the Connecticut River. Again, having spent so much time in the meadows, one year I decided I'm going to kayak the Connecticut River, but I didn't do it all at once. I did it over a series of trips. And that was my book, River Days. So maybe some future slide presentation will do that, because it's 410 miles, and every 50 miles is so different than the last 50 miles. But my favorite area on the river, if I was pinned to just Massachusetts, it would probably be up in Montague, Sutherland, because you've got rapids there, and there's very few homes along the river. You feel like you're in Vermont. But if I could go anywhere, it'd be way up to northern New Hampshire, Vermont, Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, West Stewartston, Bloomfield, Vermont. These cabins are on First Connecticut Lake, so the river has been dammed up there into 4 little lakes. Actually, they're not so little. The first one's little, the source, but the others aren't. And you can take a drive into Canada, although now you have to have a passport. But it's really cool because they have something called Magnetic Hill, where you park your car at the base of this hill and put it in neutral, and slowly your car goes backwards right back up the hill. So if you ever get to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, go over the border, just a mile or 2. It's started to hit me that I'm seeing all sorts of strange signs that I don't understand, like why is there someone in a bathing suit? Why is this anti-aircraft gun pointed at the post office? You have postal workers going postal enough. Why does this town have its town monument to a fish? Who are they trying to fool with this tower? Why is Alfred Hitchcock on the side of the road? Boy, this really gets your attention at night too. You're on this little dirt road and your headlights pick up this white outline. I sure did a double take. I never did find the reason why he put this up to many years later, that a scene in one of his movies, which I forget which one, but part of it was filmed in Granby, Vermont, and that's where I got this picture. I don't think there's a paved road in the whole town. Why is this tree deciding to grow from a rock? Why is there a spaceship on this town common? This is not trick photography. This is in Warren, New Hampshire. How did this guy get stuck in the engine? Why are they dancing? And why is he mooning me? Back to the Connecticut River. Because it's coming off the bottom of First Connecticut Lake, you've got a consistent flow, even during drought for the most part, and it's coming off nice and cold, so the trout get bigger. This is a big brown trout. And then at the very mouth of the river, you get the big striped bass. So when I'm not riding or bicycling, I'm usually fishing, either for trout or for striped bass. This has been a very strange year for striped bass. Actually, the last 2 years. Part of it, I think, is when I'm in Cape Cod Bay, now the great white sharks have moved in because the seals have come, from Monomoy all the way into Cape Cod Bay. The seals are going after the stripers. Of course, the great whites are there and the stripers scattered. So they're not coming to the places I used to be able to find them. So things are changing. The Androscoggin River, this is a great one. I love this kind of white water. I use a kayak rather than a canoe these days, a little easier. But I like that class 2, class 3. Class 4 is above my skill. I've done it twice and was lucky to get through the other side. And then this shot, you're looking down at Dixville Notch. You could actually climb to this on a relatively short hike. It's very steep, but it only took us an hour and 15 minutes, my kids and I, years ago. This is Table Rock, which is right basically across the street from the resort, the Balsams, in Dixville Notch. Lake Umbagog. So again, in the book, when I talk about this long vacation I took, I'm writing about these places. Those are bald eagles nesting at Umbagog. And I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman who had a float plane. I met him actually when I was having a couple beers in a bar. Maybe it was the wrong time to meet somebody who's a pilot, but he invited me up the next day. He had to make some deliveries, and God, the scenery was incredible. You realize just how much of Maine is still wooded and owned by paper companies, or now a lot of it's going into multiple use conservation easements, which seems like a good balance. But touching down on some of these remote lakes was just a delight. And you have those are the big stumps there that have washed up on the shore. I love the clouds too in this particular shot. And I met a real mountain man. He could do things I couldn't do, like build his own ice house and bring out ice in the middle of July. He packed it in sawdust because he has no electricity. And you see the effects of the logging company, these strip cuts as they kind of branch out. The one practice I've never been wild about is, after they do, say, a clear cut, they want a monoculture forest to grow back. They're looking for the spruce and the fir primarily. So they do lay down herbicides, and that's the big drawback to the logging, that the trees are going to grow back, but they'll do these herbicides so you don't get deciduous trees and you just get the kinds that they want. And it'll also kill off the succession plants that you would get first, which would be raspberries and blueberries. They want these trees to grow in a hurry so they can log it again. There's a wonderful hike with a beautiful water view, and it's Mount Kineo. So not to be confused with Katahdin in Maine. This is Kineo in Maine, and it rises right up from the middle of Moosehead Lake. So picture Moosehead Lake shaped like an hourglass, and this is in the center. And here's a view looking up at the cliffs of Kineo. And so the only way to get there is by boat. There is a little shuttle that runs from Rockville. And you're so high up, you're looking down at the float plane in the center of the picture. We're getting towards the tail end of the presentation, but that third year there were more surprises for me. And one was, to be a wildlife photographer, you should know your subject a little better. And the one thing I hadn't got good photos of was moose. And I will say, for those of you who want to see a moose, probably the best spot to see them is Route 3 in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. But their population is way down because of ticks. It's hard to believe that something as tiny as a tick is bringing down something as big as a moose, but they are. They get covered with ticks, and they basically suck the blood right out of the moose until they die, and that's why the numbers are way down. Part of it is due to climate change. I never saw ticks in Vermont, but now in northern Vermont, I'm starting to see a few. But I wanted to get this picture of this moose, so I put my canoe off the top of the car and started paddling towards it. And this should have been my warning. He's got the new growth of antlers, so you know it's a bull. And he's giving me the evil eye there. And I think these are the last shots that I took because it let out this huff, kind of like a, and it charged. And I think it could have easily got to me in the canoe and tipped me over, but it pulled up short. And it was the moose's way of warning me that I got way too close. So I sense I've got a lot of moose shots, but I'm doing it a lot more carefully. And I'm trying to read that body language. But if you go back, or if I go back one slide, you could see the body language there that it is not happy having me drift up to it in the canoe. And people have been attacked by moose, and I write about it in the book. A couple people I interviewed who survived the attacks. Found this in a ledge not too far from the cabin, and the old timers just called it the Indian footprints. We don't know who or how they got there, if it's really done by Native Americans or not, but they would tell me, my great-great-grandparents would tell me about these. Had some lightning issues. You could see, look at how this one split this white pine. And more recently, there's the entrance to the cabin. The cabin's an A-frame, and top of the tree came down and landed by the doorway. I was there at the time, and so I retreated inside the cabin and figured, well, I'm going to be stuck in here, so I do have electricity there. So I reached for the refrigerator to grab a beer, and I'd never seen this before. The air was so charged with electricity, bald lightning came from the handle. I hadn't touched the handle yet, but came from the steel handle. This was a refrigerator from the 1940s that came with the cabin, or the 1950s, whenever it was. And then it was about the size of, say, a tennis ball, went across the cabin, hit the back wall in a spray of sparks. I'd never seen anything like that. Since then, other people have told me stories a little different where they've seen bald lightning outside about the size, they described it about the size of a beach ball, that static electricity, if you will, rolling on the ground. Kind of like if you would rub your feet on the carpet to get sparks. This is in a bigger way. And then my brother just had an experience at the cabin 3 years ago where you see the birch trees in front. The lightning actually went into the birch tree, and he was standing in the porch, and I said, "What was it like?" And he said, "It was like going into the sun," is the way he described it. Because when I got up there, I didn't know about his closed call. All the ground was dug up, and I thought it was dug up by a bear, but what it was is the lightning going through the roots of the tree and just throwing the dirt in all directions and making this big trench. The birch tree eventually died. So that third year was kind of when I turned the corner and started, instead of reading about mountain men who, when you think about it, they destroyed the very thing they loved, taming the mountains. I would focus more on John Muir, who was trying to protect them. He's a fascinating character, and he got his start about the same time I did with the outdoors, but his story is unique in that he was actually a machinist working in a factory, and a piece of metal went into his eye, and he thought he might be blind for life, and he vowed, if I get my sight back, I'll never be indoors again. And when he got his sight back, he put on a pack and he walked from Indiana all the way to Florida. And that began his life, which ended up in the Sierras. And, I started to think, why did I buy the cabin in the first place? It wasn't to really conquer the land. It was because of the dirt roads that were slowing me down and making me recognize what's right around us. A Luna moth, it flew through my fire, so it singed the back of its tail. But something as simple as a fern. And so eventually I came to this conclusion. I call it my gratitude continuum, that if you have that sense of curiosity, it leads to wonder and well-being. But the key is to have that sense of appreciation. So, if I were to say what's the secret to enjoying the woods or enjoying life for that matter, it's that sense of appreciation and gratitude, and it leads to more opportunities. It's funny, this slide has struck a chord with a lot of people, so I think I should put it in a future book. And, I'm getting to the end of the program. If you're interested in a personalized book as a gift, or you want to do your Christmas shopping early, you can purchase them on my website. So it's just Michael and then my last name, the TOUGIAS.com. And there's a place on the website to buy books, but there's also some of the videos from the sea rescues that I've written about. That's what I'm most well known for, is true survival at sea stories. And there's one video of giant 80-foot seas and the little life raft in it. It's from my book, A Storm Too Soon. But in closing, people say, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to get around to buying a cabin. And I say, you don't need to, just having a special spot like this one. So I've got these little, what I call them, my special spots scattered around the state of Massachusetts. If I can't get to Vermont, I go to some of these places, and one of which is some of the gates at Quabbin. Quabbin's ringed by 55 different gates, access points. And it could be right in your backyard. So I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, and if anybody wants to ask questions or chats, let's see. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay.
We don't have any questions yet in the chat box. We do have a thank you from Barbara, so and I'd like to echo that. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
And we have a comment, loved your stories and wildlife information. They were both informative and entertaining, I think. I was listening the whole time, and then I just find myself chuckling sometimes, but it was also informative, so it was a lot of fun.
Really that was the theme of the book, is kind of, so many nature books are kind of, I don't know, they get ponderous and in your face, and we all have to protect nature, and it's true, we all do. But I think if you kind of tell it with a sense of humor, people still get the message and are engaged in that. We think we know what we're doing, but we just have so much to learn. I'm learning every trip to the cabin.
Right. No, I agree, and that's a great lesson. And again, it's a great lesson to have that's conveyed in a fun way.
Yeah, exactly.
We always learn more and absorb more when we're engaged and enjoying it and having fun. So if you have another comment, just excellent. Thank you.
Oh, good.
I don't have any questions, so we'll give it another minute. Actually, I'm sorry, I did not turn on the option to unmute yourselves. So you should be able to unmute yourself if you did want to say something or ask something with your microphone and camera. Someone did ask in the chat box, any waterfowl on your lake?
Yes, and that's a great question because it's kind of a new development. The first 20 years, I never saw loons up there. And now the last, I'd say 10 maybe, I see them all the time. So it's really great. One of the things that's helped the loon come back is not using fishing weights made out of lead. They were swallowing those. And then way back, we all have Rachel Carson to thank for stopping the use of DDT, which was having quite an impact on all our bird life.
We have another question. How has the pandemic affected your area?
Not too much up in Vermont there because everybody's so remote and the numbers are low up there. And I feel I'm somewhat blessed in that it hasn't affected my day-to-day life too much in that most of my hobbies are outdoors. So I'm still fishing and riding my bike and have a big vegetable garden. So I've made adjustments, but I feel for the people who live in cities and are trapped in an apartment. That must be a whole new ball game. So for me, it hasn't been too bad.
See, do we have any other? Oh.
Yeah, I have an anecdote you might be interested in. Your moose picture reminded me of it.
Yes.
Quite a few years ago, I was canoeing up in northern Alaska with some friends, and we had 5 canoes. We were going down this river, and there was a moose walking along the bank of the river, along with us. And the moose decided to cross the river. And we were swimming a line. And the moose just came straight across, right through the middle of our canoe. We had to stop and back paddle, those of us that were in the rear. And it just went right across and got up the other bank and walked away. But it could have cared less about us.
That's something. I wonder, maybe you were so remote it hadn't seen too many humans.
It was, in the Noatak River, way up north of the Arctic Circle. Wow,
good for you. Good for you. Yeah, I hope the moose population can rebound, but boy, is it low. We have moose at Quabbin. I'd see them frequently, and now I never even see a sign of a moose at Quabbin or near the cabin for that matter.
Yeah, it's really a shame about the ticks. I think I read something the other day. Somebody counted like 40,000 ticks on one moose.
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah, that's what's happening, right? And they're not even, it has nothing to do with Lyme disease. It could be any old ticks, but they're just the prevalence of them because we're not getting the super cold winters as part of it. Were there any final questions? Oh, let's see. Somebody said, what is the scariest encounter that you ever had at the cabin? No UFOs in my encounters. I'm trying to think. Actually, in the last couple years, this happened. I heard what I think was a mountain lion. They say there's no mountain lion in New England. I don't believe that. I know there's been transients here. We know that for a fact. One was killed in Connecticut not that long ago, just a few years ago. And the DNA showed it came all the way from North Dakota. So I thought I'd heard every noise in the woods, but this was unlike any noise I ever heard. And it was right like where I parked my car by the cabin. I don't know what it was, but I'm a believer that there are a couple mountain lion in Massachusetts and in New England. And if they're breeding or not, who knows? But I think it's just a matter of time. There's so many deer for them. Whether they're breeding now, we don't know, but they certainly will be in the future, I think.
And we got a thank you from the person who asked that question. Are there any final questions before we sign off? Why do the ticks go after moose and not deer?
You know, I knew the answer to that, but I can't think of it right now. There is a scientific explanation for it, and I can't remember what it is, because I just this week was wondering the same thing as I was seeing. I'm not seeing any moose, but I am seeing deer. Why don't they do the same thing to other wildlife? And I'm not sure what that is. You stumped me, so I applaud you.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you especially to Michael for that wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening and out of your wonderful outdoors life, especially at the end of the summer. Like, we're winding down and it's starting to cool off. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and to share your experiences.
And Becky, thank you for setting it all up. I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, and stay safe, everyone, and hope that when the Waters Between Us comes out, we can do it in person.
We'd love that. All right, thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Take care.
Good night. Thanks, Becky.
You're welcome.